this reminds me of teaching in Zoom probably about 6 months into Melbourne's longest lockdown. I think it went for about almost a year, but where everyone turned their cameras off. So that's all right. I'm used to it, and it's all good. So welcome and thanks for coming along today. Wherever you are, whatever time zone you're in, it's very convenient for me right now, so I'm lucky. Well, what's this session about? Essentially, my goal today is to go through the process, demystify some of the process of publication in IRSS, the International Review of Sociology of Sport, point out a few things that I've learned. I've been the editor now of the journal since January 1, so had a bit of time to get my feet under the desk and have identified some things. And really, I see the role of the journal and the role of the editor and the editorial board is to serve scholars in the field who want to submit their work and to make it as easy for them to try to get their work into print. So we're not seeing this as a process of trying to say it's not good enough. I think a lot of work it could be good enough, and I want to work with you today to try to work out how to get it there. So hopefully we've started to fill out that survey. I'll have a look at that in a minute. And I'm not going to talk for that long. So really the chance is for question and answer and that sort of thing. So I'll just share my screen now. That one there. So sharing, and I imagine you can all see the slideshow. Yes. Nicola, give me a thumbs up because I can see you. That's it. I like that. Thank you so much. So essentially what we're going to try to do today initially is just go through, I kind of talk about what I actually see and how I work out how you get into print. Something that we all need to do as either established academics, HDR or PhD students, or early career academics. We're in an industry that says we have to publish something, and I'd like to think that the International Review for Sociology of Sport is a great place to get published. In fact, my first publication ever was in the International Review of Sociology of Sport. So it's almost 20 years old now, and that came out of, I was a PhD student at the time. So it's a personal journey, and every time you put your work out there, there is, it can be a nerve-wracking experience because, you know, you're exposing yourself to the blind review process. You're putting something out that you've worked on and you know really well and you think is really important out to your peers, and they might not always agree with you. So just wanted a bit of history there. There it is. So like I said, today we're just going to go through some very simple steps. We'll go on to I'll give you a couple of examples of things, and then really I'd love to hear, and hopefully the survey will have a look at the end, what you feel, how you feel about not just IRSS, but the publication process. And then I'm looking for guidance from anyone in the room of how we can make the journal better to serve our community, which is the sociology of sport and cognate areas. So I guess the first thing to understand is that whilst the title of the journal is Sociology, if you've read anything in the journal, you see that we have a very broad and not restrictive approach to scholarship. Okay, so we're not trapped in theory, we're not trapped in methodology per se. We publish quantitative and qualitative and mixed methods and autoethnographic and textual analysis, research, and often there is an intersection between the other fields of anthropology or cultural studies, geography, gender studies, media studies, very popular. History is important, right? Political economy, semiotics, and of course this is an interdisciplinary journal. So everyone who's writing or researching might have aspects of all these different perspectives in their work. There's definitely a way to make that work fit within the broad scope of this journal. And of course, this journal is the journal of the International Sociology of Sport Association, ISA, and it's next year is the 60th anniversary of the organisation and the journal, which is pretty amazing. It's the longest standing journal in the field of sociology of sport. So, what should you submit? I'll tell you straight up, your best work, your favourite part, whatever you're doing, your best work. We have an acceptance rate of around about 20%, which means about 80% of the papers that come into the journal are rejected for publication. And that's not because we try to say, well, we're going to reject 80%. It's just the way it works out. And when I say that, that's based on either, and I'll explain that in a moment, either the peer review process or even getting past the editor in the first stage of submission. So some really important points here to think about when we think about publishing. And the first thing is I'm just going to move my screen now to go to this one. Everyone can see the website now. Yep. Read the submission guidelines and understand what you need to do to submit your manuscript. Often, and I'm thinking here now of PhD students or early career researchers who might be really into a big body of work. The recommended word limit of a research article in IRSS is 8,000 words. So when you send in 15,000 words, it's 2 papers, but it's not going to, I can't send that through. So when we're thinking about this, we need to think about referencing style. Often we have different referencing styles. Make sure that the referencing style is correct. Read what to do when submitting and preparing your manuscript. You click on here, it has all the information, and every journal usually has this information. So stylistically, make sure it's right. And that also includes the organisation of the manuscript. Now, I know that in different cultural contexts, in different academic contexts, you'll notice my PhD was actually done research in Japan. And I know that in publishing in Japan, there are different protocols for publication than there might be in IRSS and certainly in English language. All right, so make sure that you try to match that manuscript to following the steps to make it fit within the context of this particular journal. And then you want to ensure that you're joining a conversation. I think step 2 is really important. So if you haven't read in the journal that you're trying to submit to, it's good to check out your topic and then read it in that term. Search through the journal and see, has other people written in this journal about this topic? Because often we might not have come across that literature in our work. Okay. If you do that, it's really good because what it does is it positions your work within a broader academic and intellectual conversation that exists in that space. All right. And the chances are that because that's your topic, the reviewers I select are probably going to be related to some of that work. So you want to join their conversation before they get to you, if you know what I mean. All right. Before you submit anything, make sure you've got your critical friends available to give you some feedback. Now, obviously, if you're a PhD student, that would be your supervisor. If you're working, in a team, well, it's your other authors. Now, I know authorship can sometimes be something that might be multiple, but someone's carrying most of the load. So make sure that that's shared. Make sure that you get that input. or a mentor or a colleague in a cognate area who can read your work and give you some feedback. The stronger it is when it's first submitted to the journal, the better chance it has of getting past that 20, or being part of that 20% acceptance rate. Okay. The key point is so as an editor, I don't get paid to edit. I work full time as an academic, and I do this at night time. And essentially every night I open up the journal and I have a look to see what's submitted. And so far this year we've had 300 submissions, so you can work out how many that is a day on average. And I want to get everyone in, but you've got to meet me somewhere in the middle. So like I said, if you make it easy for me to read, because I'm going to read your work first, and if it fits and it looks like a paper and it reads like a paper and it's been polished and it's referenced correctly and it's the word limit, it makes it much easier for me to smile and say, oh, I can do this. This one's going to be good. Okay. When you're thinking about that, the other thing you need to think about is your title and your abstract and your keywords. Right? These things are really important because when we send it out to review, getting reviewers to click on I accept the review, a title that doesn't have any sort of, that's a bit dull, or that's very specific, might limit the chances of a reviewer saying, yeah, I'll accept that to look at. So we think about how we write our abstract, how we write our title. Title should be broad enough to include people, but, you know, and then the abstract can be more specific about what this is actually about. Cover letters are an interesting thing. I would appreciate a cover letter if it included information about you as the author and about where you're at in your journey in publication. If you're a PhD student, write me a letter and tell me that, because I don't know who you are in most cases. But if you're in a position where you're coming up, then that gives me some context. Okay. When you write your cover letter, probably don't put the abstract in the cover letter. I've already read that. So just be aware of that. And also another point, and I've seen this many times, don't send a cover letter that has another journal in the cover letter. So you've already sent it somewhere else and you've just sent it on to the next one. You haven't changed the cover letter because it's so kind of, you don't think about that. So be aware of it. Personalize the cover letter. It doesn't need to be long. Explain where you're at, why this research is important, and that's good. You don't have to do it. But if you do, then that's what I would be looking to read as opposed to an abstract. Okay. And also the final thing is ensure that your work is anonymous when you submit it. And often we do that pretty well, but some of the faults that I see is it might include a funding source or an institutional ethics number, which means it can be tracked. And sometimes if you are an experienced writer, appropriate self-citing. So citing your own work, if it's important in the field in the context of a lit review, is fine, but over-citing your own work throughout a paper makes it pretty clear to any possible reviewer that we know who the author is. And we want to make sure we don't know the double-blind process. We want to keep that as it is. Okay, so this is the submission stuff. We'll just move on to, and I reckon I've been talking about something else, haven't I? When you do Zoom very infrequently, I apologise for that. I was looking at something. Where's my mouse gone? Chris, I wish you could do the PowerPoint as well, mate.
Sorry, Brent, that's on you.
Yeah. And now my mouse has gone crazy. There I am. I'll just move forward. So those were the points I was just making there. You can all see that now, yes? There we go. So essentially, these are the key things. So just to demystify this process, essentially everything arrives, like I said, I'll go home at night, I'll go home after this, and I'll click onto the IRSS page, and I'll say, what's arrived today? And I'll try to do that most days of the week for an hour or two. And whatever's there, I'm going to read in its entirety straight up. So that's my process. I'm just letting you know how I do it. And I'm going to read it. And hopefully I've had a good day at work. Maybe if I've had a bad day at work, I won't read anything. But if I've had a good day at work, I'll read it. And there's three possibilities at that point. I'm either going to accept it and send it out for review. I'm going to reject it and say it's not appropriate. Or I'm going to say there are issues. For example, you need to make it anonymous. And they'll send it back and you'll have to resubmit it. Okay. So essentially, the things I'm looking for in terms of accept, reject is it sociology? Does it intersect with the other disciplinary perspectives that we have? Is it on the limit or thereabouts? So 8,000 I'm not really fussed about, but, you know, within reason, a couple of hundred words, 200 or 300 words either side is fine. Does it make sense? Because I don't know all the fields. So my personal work is in inclusion and diversity and migration. So probably if I get something on gender studies, I can read it and I teach that, but I'm not an expert. So therefore I'd be saying, okay, does this look like it is good enough? And if it is, then I'll say accept and I send it out to review. The other two possibilities are there. All right. When I accept it, I'm going to then invite usually about 4 or 5 reviewers. Now you can, it's within your rights, it's the journal's policy, you can recommend someone to be a reviewer. That doesn't mean I have to accept that. You can also say, I prefer you not to send it to this person. And I'm probably more likely to accept that. So I usually send out to 4 or 5, and if you're accepted at that point, you'll get a minimum of 2 reviews. But it's not unusual for all 4 or 5 to accept the job because the title's so amazing and the abstract's so cool that they go, wow, this is great. I want to read this. And then we'll have 5 reviewers. At that point, well, your lucky day. You're going to get 5. And generally speaking, the time frame is 4 weeks. At the moment, the journal, so from acceptance to send out to review to first decision, we're running at 24 days, which is pretty cool. That's less than 4 weeks, but it can take longer. Obviously, what you've got to remember about reviewers is that they are also working academics, that they are time poor, and that they're doing this as part of service to the broader discipline. Okay? So then once all the reviews are out, they come back in, and then I'll make a decision based on those reviews. So the possibilities at that stage are accept, minor revision, major revision, or reject. So they're the 4 possibilities. And often we will have reviewers who disagree. We'll have a reviewer who says accept and someone says reject, someone says minor revision. So at that point, as the editor, my role is to mediate those decisions, make my own evaluation of the paper, and then make a decision that's balanced on those reviews. Okay? And at that point, I'll put an email together. All the feedback should be in the email from the reviewers, and then you'll get that decision, and then it's off to you. So, when you get it, when you're dealing with a revision. Okay. Some things to think about, and I'm sure I'm going to see this when we look at our Survey Monkey in a moment. People have good days and bad days. They review on good days and bad days. We draw on reviewers from multiple linguistic backgrounds. And that means that people have different ways of expressing their ideas, their critique, depending on how they use the language that we're relying on for the journal, which is English. All right. So sometimes reviews can be particularly blunt, I should say. And it can seem pretty harsh criticism. But I can guarantee you that 99% of the time, it's designed to be constructive, not dismissive. And I can guarantee that any reviewer wants to see your work improve. Even if they reject it, they're trying to give you direction for improvement. Because the other thing is, as humans, we've all experienced rejection. And we've all had our papers rejected. We've all had tough reviews. I can think of one paper that I published once. It actually got rejected from 4 separate journals. And initially I was furious. But on reflection, as I went through that process, I realized that the comments that were in there were valid and that I knew my stuff really well, but I wasn't communicating it very well. And so that gave me great direction to change. And now I'm really proud of that paper. Okay. So a key thing in responding to a review is don't rush. Read it several times. Maybe read it several times, take a couple of days. Don't respond immediately, especially if it's a harsh review, because you're going to react. It's like sending an email when you shouldn't send an email, you know. Just let things sit and then contemplate. Again, talk to your important person, your mentor, your supervisor, a colleague about it, work through it, okay? And then prepare your response. And when you respond, you need to do 2 things. It's interesting how this often doesn't happen with people's responses. With a reviewer, when you send in a revision, I'm going to send it back to those reviewers. Most of them agree to keep working with you. Even if they said they reject your work, they often tick, yes, I'm willing to work with this person again. Amazing generosity. But you've got to make it easy for them. So you need to prepare 2 documents when you do this. One is you need a tracked or highlighted changes on a manuscript. These are the changes I've made. Make sure that they're genuine changes. Don't just add words. So for example, you can't make a paper go from 8,000 words to 12,000 words because you've just added words. Because now you push the boundaries, and I'm liable to reject that paper because you haven't really responded, you've just added. Mostly, big revisions require some form of larger change, a rethinking. And so you need to do that. Okay. The second thing you need to do, and I'll show you an example right now, is you need to produce a response to reviewers' document. And I have one right here. Can everyone see that? Nicola, give me the thumbs again. Yes, you can see it. Great. Love your work, mate. So here's an example. I've redacted some of it because it kind of identifies the work. But you can see here, this is a response to reviewer. And things to think about is be respectful. You can see here the reviewer. I would like to thank the authors. The response from the author. I would like to thank the reviewers. You know, being respectful through this process is really important. And then responding through this document to how you've identified each of the reviewer's points. And you can see here, this author has responded at length, etc., etc. And this is fantastic. This makes the reviewer who puts in the labour for free feel like my contribution to this has been recognised. Now, it's really important to understand, as the author, you do not have to agree with the reviewer. It's your work. But you need to respond to the reviewer. So this is not a process of, if I just do what they say, everything will be fine. No. That's usually when you add 4,000 words, right? The important thing here is to respond to the reviewer in a way that you've engaged with them in that conversation. And you don't have to agree. In fact, as the editor, I'm going to be looking at that to say, well, I see that as that what you said there is valid. Maybe I disagree with that reviewer's point. We do have different perspectives. But you've gone through that process, that intellectual process of the back and forward of thinking about a critique, responding to that critique, accepting parts of it, disagreeing with parts of it, explaining why you disagree or why you haven't done this particular recommendation. And as a result, the reviewer, when they get the work back, is going to say, okay, right, I can see you've engaged with this. The reviewer will also see the other reviewers' comments. So they'll be able to make an understanding or a judgment. Oh, I see. So you've responded to the other reviewers in this way and they disagree with me as well. Okay, this is good. Critique makes our work better for sure. That example of a response is exactly what we wanted. Okay, so at that point, it comes back in. The reviewers then make another judgment. At that stage, they can reject, accept, minor or major. Generally speaking, from this point, it's a minor or an accept if you've really responded well to the reviewers. And we continue through that process until we get something that is a much tighter, much nicer, much clearer contribution to our field. And I guess that's the deal. So now let's have a look. I'm just going to go to where's my survey? I might just stop the share for a second. Well, we've got there 30 in the room, and if you've got any questions, I'm happy for you to hold on. To pop that in the chat, or you can put your little paw up in the air and ask. But we did have a survey at the beginning, and just going to have a look at what people said. Hopefully, people have done it. We'll see who we've got in the room. Just waiting for my survey monkey to kick on. All right, I might share my screen again. Let's see who we are. So I noticed by the names in the room that we do have some experienced people. So you were asked, have you published previously? We've got seven of us haven't. It's fantastic. Maybe we've got time, we can have a wee chat. And then we had to rate our experience of the different processes. So if you have published, we can see here. And in terms of that, no one's rated the experience as terrible. That makes me feel good. In terms of timely feedback, quality of the review and timely publication, obviously this might not be IRSS. We pride ourselves on trying to work hard to get your work out as soon as we can, if it gets through. You can see here, for people who have published, it's a pretty positive experience. We did ask for comments. It depends on the journal. There you go. Well, you know, like I said, IRSS is there to serve you. That's our job, to serve our community of scholars, and that's what we want to do. Our biggest concern when getting published. I don't like that. Here we go. Word limits a little bit, not really. The language of publication. And I understand that. This has always been an issue, but I've noted over time that with new technologies, with the services that IRSS offer and SAGE offer in terms of language assistance, not to mention that before I became an academic at the tender age of 35, I'd been an English as a second language teacher. So even in our reading of your work now, I understand how to read people whose first language isn't English. It might be your third, fourth, fifth language, and we want to make sure that we can provide a space for your work. So if it's not perfect, it's all right. If the ideas are good, we can work with that. And we can, like I said, assist with that language preparation. All you need to do is reach out. Okay, we're here to help. Structure of the papers. Tough reviewers is the greatest concern. And I'm sure there'd be some people in the room who could share some stories of that, and maybe we don't need that trauma right now, so we might let that one slide. And being rejected is a major issue. It's hard. It hurts, I guarantee. But it also, like I said, if we can take the personal out of it a little bit and look at the critique, there's usually something in that. And it could also be that you've sent it to the wrong journal. You know, I've been reading some papers recently that have come in that are clearly sport performance papers. There's not a lot of sociology, not a lot of anything in them that fits within the journal. So that's not going to get through. That's clearly doesn't fit. But if you think, oh, I think this is the spot for it, and no one really gets it, or they're harsh on it, it probably means that you haven't communicated the way that you need to reach an audience. So there are other ways to communicate your work. You know, you can communicate in all sorts of ways. You can create your own, you know, put it on LinkedIn or whatever social media stuff you use. You can put your findings, you can put your ideas in different formats. All right. So that's a possibility. But in the academic, in this situation, rejection is inevitable. I'm guessing the 15 there agree because they've experienced it. There's one person that's amazing. And let's see. This is the important stuff. So I'm hoping that I've explained the first question that comes up there, the insights of what's expected on the other side of the table. If I haven't, put it in the chat so I don't, and explain which part you don't get. Yep. Information about IRSS. Hopefully that's been done. I'll just keep moving down. Timeframes, expectations, review process. Yeah. I think this is normal, right? Like whether you're doing, and this could be the case, all of you, if you submit to the journal, the chances are at some stage you're going to review for the journal. And that's a responsibility, and we don't take that lightly, I guess. And we, you know, hopefully if you've had a good experience of being reviewed, even if it is a rejection, that you understand that there's, you know, you think about how I like to be treated, and then you put that back when you do a review. Well, I think we've answered that one. Now, I'm assuming this means strict on. Does this one here? I would like to know whether this journal is fair for researchers. I felt part of the past editor was strict. for or against qualitative. I mean, it's interesting because I'm a qualitative researcher. I'm not a quantitative researcher, but that doesn't mean I can't read quantitative research. So I will send that out to reviewers who are quantitative researchers who can really read it on a deeper level, and particularly in terms of the statistical analyses that have been used in the paper. But I hope that a particular methodology will not be restricted because of a personal bias that I might have. Hopefully that is not the case, certainly with the journal moving forward. Recent trends in IRSS. Recent trends. Much of the same, really. I think we see little pockets of environmental research now starting to come through, and I think that's a really interesting area for scholars to think about, especially if it's like in the future. We have a special issue that was recently put out or advertised for, which is sport, the sociology of sport in the Anthropocene. And so I think that will be a really interesting volume, and there's certainly some really interesting abstracts that were submitted to that. When we have a special issue, I don't manage the special issue. So people nominate to become the editors of a special issue, and they manage that editorial process for that particular part. Obviously, they work with me, but I'm relying on them as they're experts in that particular area to decide and work through the papers that are accepted. Convert work from a thesis into work that can be published is a really good question. This is always an issue. I know I've done that because you run the risk of condensing your intro, your literature review, your method, and your findings from 4 chapters and try to put it into 8,000 words. That's not going to work. So I think one thing that's really important, that in your introduction you establish the context of where your research is occurring, because often we're doing the same. We might be looking at the same theme. I'll give you an example. Would be, say, content analysis of media related to gender representation. Okay. Let's explain the context of where your research is coming from, how it might be joining the broader field of the work that's been done in that space. How your particular perspective might be different or important to understand in relation to the broader body of work. So contextualizing your thesis in the beginning of the paper, and you can say, this is part of a bigger work. People do that all the time. This is part of a bigger work. What I'm going to focus on is this particular part of my research, what I found. Obviously, you've got your methodology, and you need to explain that. You can't just say, "Oh, yeah, that's in another paper." Okay, you need to explain how. You need to suggest to us as readers that we should believe this work. There is an empiricism of some form to this work. There's a process to how you understand the world through this work. Okay, there's a process to that, and there's a process not that's necessarily reproducible. It's not that sort of, doesn't have to be like that, but that we can see and say, yeah, that seems like a reasonable. Some people would say valid, but I'd say a reasonable way to try to understand a question and answer a question that you've got. And that's really important, that once you contextualize your paper, that you do explain, what are my aims in this paper? Spell them out to the reader. Okay, I'm on the hook now. I want to know how you answer this question and what came out. I think one of the things I would say for that question about converting a thesis is to avoid giant descriptive sections. I've been reading a few recently that have come through, and the discussion is basically all descriptive. It never rejoins the literature in the beginning. Make sure that you rejoin the body of work. I mean, we can describe the world, but we're trying to describe it relative to some form of theoretical perspective, usually. So make sure that you reattach that you reconnect with that. And if it doesn't do that sociologically, I might say, listen, this might be better suited to a sport management journal or sport psychology journal or something else, sport pedagogy journal, sport coaching journal, sport education journal. Okay, so I can give you guidance there. So once again, rejection doesn't mean it's not good. It might not be suited to the mission of the journal that we're talking about here. Okay, and there's more tips there. Well, I'm going to stop that share and let's have a look in the chat. So I've tried to address most things, but I'm happy to. We've got time. I'm going nowhere. If anyone would like to ask a specific question, feel free. Hey, Anna. How you doing?
Hi. Could I ask a question, Brent? Because
Of course. Yes.
I think a lot of us kind of work across different disciplines, and you might have a background in sociology or sport science or sport management or gender studies or whatever. But could you kind of elaborate a bit? When is it sociological enough and when is it not, in terms of if you're wondering if it's suitable for IRSS or not? Do you have any like tips or tricks of kind of because people obviously have different viewpoints on this?
Yeah. Look, that's a great question, and you know, I'm not wedded to a discipline. I think that for me, the most important thing is that the question that you're trying to answer has some element that involves the social or something about humans in a sociological sense. And then the tools that we might use, the theories we might use to make sense of that can come from, like you've just identified, many different disciplines. One of the things that I will do, often if I'm reading the paper, I'm going, well, it's kind of, is it interdisciplinary or is it just really psychology? Because that sometimes happens. And if it's just so one thing that I often do is when I finish reading the paper, I'll go through the references. And if it hasn't engaged with anything to do in our field at all, then usually to me that says maybe it shouldn't necessarily join the conversation here. And that doesn't mean it hasn't referenced an IRSS paper, for example, but that it hasn't engaged with any of the journals that might involve sociological thinking, or, for example, any of the major authors who have written sociologically about an issue. So that's like I said, that was that join the conversation thing. But I guess in terms of that broader question, I think the research question is the key thing. And then does that research question inform us of something novel about the relationship between sport and society? And obviously, you know, that's where that intersectional or that interdisciplinary approach can solve that problem. And it needs to be interdisciplinary. I guess that would be the last point, and is that if it is just monodisciplinary, for example, I get a paper and it's like, this is really just all psychology. It hasn't, so it's viewing the human in a particular way. Okay, It's not even jumping into social psychology, or there's just a smidgen of social psychology. At that point, I probably won't even let it go through for a review, because I don't want to burn reviewers by sending something out to them who are going to say, what is this? This is not, and then the review that they're going to give is going to be obvious. So I will usually respond to the author in the rejection and say, if you want to join this conversation, you need to do X, Y, Z. Maybe you should read Anna's work on boxing and gender. There you go. If that's missing, I might recommend that to an author, and they can revise their work and resubmit afterwards based on that rejection. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Sweet.
Oh, hi, Brent. It's Graham Lee here from closer to you, probably. I just had a question about if we are looking at publishing parts of our thesis, and let's say, for example, I want to publish a paper on my methodology and a paper on my findings. Is there an order in which you'd recommend that we actually do that?
Not necessarily, but I think there might be. It depends what you feel is ready to go. So if you're trying to publish while you're writing your PhD, so if you're doing it at the same time, which is quite, that can be tricky. So sometimes you'll have something that's really developed, and then but you haven't finished your PhD yet. Publishing whilst doing it. In those situations, you want to, if your methodology is really, really solid, then that would be a good thing to send out. But it might not be then you'd want to pick the right journal. There are lots of methodological journals out there that would benefit, that would join a conversation. I know your work, particularly on that's with the kids and disability, but spectrum. You presented at TASA a couple of years ago, right?
Yes, non-verbal children, communication with coaches.
Children. Yeah, coaching and non-verbal children. So that might fit in so choosing where that would go would be really key. So your findings might fit in one journal, and your methodology might fit in another journal. And there might be a journal that has something to do with the history of something that might fit in a different journal again. So I guess it's choosing where to put those things, how well developed they are. If you're doing it while you're still writing, then that can be a challenge. But it's also great because it gives you feedback on your thesis in real time before you send it out for examination. So I hope that helps.
It definitely does. Luckily, I'm in the submitted file, but yeah, it really does help to know, which way to go with what comes first.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, congratulations, Graham. That's great.
Thank you.
Yeah, well done. Yay.
I think Lucy Moore has a really good question in the chat.
Okay, yep. I'll just
I don't know if you've seen it, Brent.
I'm going to sit now. Oh, yeah. This is an interesting one, right? When you get the lover and the hater, which one is it going to be? So, I've seen people in a review play one reviewer against the other reviewer. I don't think that's the right way to go about it. So going, well, I'm going with a reviewer that loves me, and we're going to double down on the hater. It's usually not hate. So what you've got to do is you've got to say, okay, I've got to work with these two reviewers. Both reviewers are going to see each other's review. So remember that. They're going to see that when they get the response, because you're going to put it all in one document. So that's going to be part of your thing. And you can use reviewer 1 to rebut reviewer 2, but you've got to do it respectfully, and you don't want to just do it carte blanche and just do it through everything. So I hope that makes sense. The other thing you can do is write to the editor and say, can you give me some direction on how to deal with this review? That's my job. Editors should do that. I do that regularly. Recently got one. I had 2 really good reviews and 1 review that was kind of that the author took as very harsh, and we worked out a strategy about how to respond to that. So reach out to the editor and get some direction. They'll give you the direction. Hope that answers the question. All right. Good on you. Thanks, Lucy. All right. Well, if there are no other questions at this exam, oh yes, Nicola, good.
Good morning, Brent. Good morning, everybody. Well, good morning from the UK anyway. I think it's probably a different time zone where you are. I just have a quick question, and I want to expand on what you were talking about in relation to publishing something from your PhD thesis. So I'm a second year PhD student at the moment. And I'm just knowing, when is the best time to start thinking about publication? Because I do want to publish in the IRSS, but I just need to know kind of, what do you think is the right time to start thinking about it?
I think it is if you feel like there's something that you can say. If you feel like you've got either something that's developed enough that says something, or that you've got data that you really want to get out there because you've got this cool analysis of that data, then absolutely I'd start thinking about it. My advice would be find a conference, present your work at a conference, get feedback on that. But it's not an overview of your thesis. It's you trying to make your pitch about your research. The 20-minute pitch that you get at a conference is a good time to get some feedback about your work to help you shape it for then an article, I think.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, but that sounds exciting. Like, you know, bounce some ideas off your supervisor. They usually should be able to give you that guidance. And, you know, sometimes they might go, finish the thesis first, because otherwise you'll never get it done. But like I said to Graham before, it's great feedback to get, even if you get rejected, because it'll point to, okay, maybe I haven't got it right yet in terms of expression or communication. And if I do that better from that feedback, then my thesis is going to be stronger and everything will improve from there. So yeah, when's the right time? I wouldn't say there's a right or a wrong time. I'd say if you've got something to say and you can actually say it with some authority, and it's not just a bit of a veneer. And that often happens when we do our PhDs, is we feel like every day is a massive discovery of like, oh my God, this is amazing. And so that's good. That's exciting. But sometimes just, yeah, take a moment. But yeah, put it in a presentation, put it in a conference, put it out there, get the feedback, shape it up. That article that I first wrote in IRSS, I presented in Cologne at the ISA conference in 2003. And I spoke way too quickly. And most of the audience couldn't understand what I said. So, but I got that feedback, and that made me think about language and communication and thinking about how I would shape a paper. So it was good.
That's great information. Thank you. I think it's because, I don't know if there's any other PhD students in the conference this morning, but there's contradictory information. So there's some seminars that I've been to have said it's really important to start, excuse me, publishing early. So trying to get something whilst you're completing your PhD if you want an academic career. And then others like yourself have said, you know, perhaps it isn't necessarily the best thing to do. It's better to get the feedback and to reflect on that and improve and make your thesis quite watertight. So it can be quite confusing, I think, but certainly what you've just said there about taking that time and getting some feedback from a conference is very useful. Thank you.
Yeah. The only final thing I would say there is that ISA at their conference has a graduate paper award, and any graduate student can enter that graduate paper award and they can submit the paper, it will be examined or reviewed by usually 2 or 3 members of the IRSS board or advisory board, and you'll get feedback there. And I think in the annual general meeting in a moment, we will get to see who won the award this year or the previous year, and whether you win the award or come second or don't, you'll get feedback there as well. So that's a really good one. If you win the award, then the idea is that we work that up to be a publication in IRSS. So there's something to think about.
Thank you.
Great. Well, I think, unless there's anything else, I think we've done our hour. I hope that you've there's Alana. I hope that it's been informative in some way. You know, I can't express enough how important all the people who do reviews are, and I know there's some of them in the room, and I appreciate their work every single day. No, it doesn't. I don't think so, Sophia. It doesn't weaken the, as long as it's not verbatim out of the thesis. So that's the important thing. Don't just cut and paste thesis into journal paper, because when we cut and paste it, then it is verbatim. You want to adapt, and that's why a journal article should be an adaptation of parts of your thesis. So it won't do that. I hope that makes sense. Great. Well, great to see you. Hopefully, yes, Alana, go.
If that's okay.
Yes.
Mine's a bit of a unique circumstance for the graduate paper that I'll kind of be in between master's and PhD. Do you know if I still would be eligible to apply or to submit?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, perfect.
No problem at all.
Brilliant.
Do that.
You.
Put it in there. Let's get competitive.
Thank you.
Great. Yeah, so I think the AGM's on now. So once again, thank you for attending today, whatever time zone it's in. Good luck with your research, your publications, your careers, and your day or night. And look, hopefully I'll see some people next year at the ISSA conference in Seoul in Korea. And that's certainly something I go around to and listen to people present and then come and say, you should publish that work in the journal. And we work with each other. So it's not competitive. We want to be cooperative. There's a bit of solidarity in the journal, and we should have some solidarity with each other to help each other's work get to that next level. Okay, great. Take it easy. See ya. Bye.